Good morning and happy Friday. I'm Marta Nielsen with Utah State University Extension, and I have a new extension expert here with me today that I'm so excited to introduce to you. We have Becky Hales. She's the assistant horticulturist and diagnostician, head diagnostician. I just asked you what to say and I totally messed it up. But Becky is amazing.
No, you got it.
She's in Salt Lake County, so if you've visited the diagnostic desk there, you have probably met Becky. And today we're going to talk to something that's very near and dear to my heart. I was just telling Becky I am a highly allergic person, and we are going to talk about allergies and the garden, the landscape, what you can do in your own home landscape to kind of help give yourself a little boost when it comes to allergies and preventing allergies, as far as, pollens and trees and grasses and all that good stuff that those of us who are allergic know all about. So Becky, right? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what it is that you love to do with extension and in the garden.
So I am officially a plant nerd. I have been studying ad nauseum for probably the past 20 years, and I have been gardening all over the country. I grew up in California. I've spent at least 20 years just in Utah, and then I also gardened up and down the East Coast. So I've had a lot of experience in different climates, and Utah's a little challenging, but it's fun. I've been with Extension for about 3 years. I joined the Master Gardener program right when the previous diagnostician left, and so they hired me out of that program. So it has been a wild ride, and it is amazing how much you learn at the diagnostic desk.
Yes, we see some crazy things. I just see them as I'm, walking by the desk every day, but yeah, people bring in some really interesting things for sure.
So true. But really, the place that I love to be is out in my garden. I even like weeding. It's just so therapeutic.
If you ever want to get some of that weed therapy, you can come to my house anytime, Becky.
Well, I live in a yard right now that when we moved in, it had grown nothing but weeds for 30 years.
Oh, my goodness.
So the weed pressure in our yard is enormous, and I do a lot of weed pulling in my yard.
Oh,
lots of therapy.
So good thing that you enjoy it a little bit, at least.
Exactly. And I have the same problem you do, that I'm allergic to everything.
Yeah. Yep. If it grows or has fur, I'm probably allergic to it. So it's fun in Utah. We have lots of fun things that make me sneeze, but I think a lot of people do. A lot of people face those seasonal allergies. So let's dig into that a little bit.
Okay, and I want to start by just saying we're not physicians. I'm not a physician. I don't have a medical degree. I don't diagnose allergies. I'm not going to be able to tell you what you're allergic to. But I am a horticulturist, and I'm trying to reduce the amount of pollen so that allergies are not as common.
Yeah.
Does that make more sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, and I kind of want to start by saying in the 1950s, allergies only affected 2% of the population.
Wow.
Right? But now, okay, so in 2019, the percentage of adults that had allergies was 30%, and children it was 40%.
That's a huge increase.
Huge. And it gets worse every single year. The American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology estimates that $18 billion is spent on allergies every year.
Oh my goodness. That's a lot of Claritin.
It is a lot of Claritin. A lot of Allegra in my house.
Yes, all of them at my house. We have to do a few different ones. That's crazy though.
Just under control, right?
Yeah. And just the idea that, and I wonder some of that too, if it's just like an increased awareness. Probably a combination of like we're getting more allergic, but we're also more aware of like, oh, this is what's happening, and we know some things we can do to alleviate the symptoms and things like that.
That is very possible. I always thought I didn't have allergies, but I sneezed every single day of my life. And the only reason why I finally broke down and admitted it is because when I moved to South Carolina, we had this lovely privet hedge and it came into bloom. And I was so sick, I couldn't get out of bed for a week.
Oh my gosh.
But when I was in the car with the air conditioning on, I felt fine.
So that kind of was a clue. Like maybe there's something going on here.
A little bit of a clue, yeah. So I had to kind of break down and admit that I did have allergies. So annoying. So I also want to go through what the bucket theory of allergies is. And I'm not sure, have you ever heard of that?
I have. You
have?
I've heard a cup. I actually have a cup here with me. So,
yep.
Object lesson.
Object lesson. Thank you very much. Okay. So the theory goes something like this. When you wake up in the morning, you have an empty bucket. And you walk past a desk and trail your fingers along, and some dust pops up in the air, and it goes into your allergy bucket, but it's not very full, so you still feel great.
Yeah.
Right? Then you pet your dog, and that goes into your allergy bucket, but again, you're not anywhere near being full, so you still feel fine. You might eat something at breakfast that you're a little bit allergic to, that goes into your bucket. And then you walk outside to get the newspaper, you get a puff of pollen in the air, and all of a sudden that bucket is over full and you have symptoms and you don't feel great.
So you don't start feeling those symptoms until you've reached that threshold and your bucket is full and ready to overflow.
Exactly. And so you may not even realize that you're allergic to all of those things that led up to that point.
Yeah.
Right? And so the idea is with this whole landscaping and allergies and plants is that you want to reduce the number of allergens that are going into your bucket.
Yeah.
So that hopefully you never get to that threshold and you never have symptoms.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And some of those things are within your control and some are not. So
exactly.
And
go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing that we've done, this is kind of a sidebar. One thing that we've done at my house that has made a huge difference for me is we've put in air filters. So I actually have a plug-in air purifier that I have next to my bed. And nighttime is a huge allergy time for me. I lay down and go to sleep and suddenly I'm all stuffy and, can't breathe through my nose. That's made a huge difference. So like you talked about dust, I think that's made an impact in that way. But there are other things that we can control in our landscape.
Oh, absolutely. So getting back to the landscape, one of the theories that has come up on why those allergies have increased so much over the past 70 years is because of the way we are landscaping our nation. Okay. So in the 1960s and 1970s, which is right when all of those allergies started to increase, something happened to all of our landscape trees. At the time, everybody had an elm tree for their street tree. It was a very popular tree. It was everywhere in the United States. And it was taken out by Dutch elm disease. And as those trees started to die, and they were half male, half female, they were just like the perfect street tree, right? Yeah. They didn't create a whole lot of pollen. They were just really lovely trees. And when they were replaced, that was right when cloning, became a big thing in nursery propagation, creating new plants. Okay. So the big thing coming out of the nurseries were these mess-free trees that were male clones that didn't produce any seeds. They didn't produce any fruits. And this made everybody super happy. They didn't want to clean up after their trees. So they put in all these male trees. What they didn't realize was those male trees were adding litter, but it was all unseen litter. It was all pollen.
Oh, no.
Right. So they can actually track the uptick of allergies as people started to replace their trees across the United States.
With all of these male trees that were producing huge amounts of pollen. Oh, my goodness.
currently like 4 out of 5 trees that are placed in landscapes are male trees only.
Wow. And that kind of, I'm like, oh, that kind of makes sense, because I notice in the spring in my neighborhood, especially when it rains and you see the puddles and there's just this like layer of yellow across all the puddles, and you can physically see the pollen everywhere. So that totally, that totally makes sense.
It is absolutely insane. And you've got to think that the biggest plants in your yard, which are trees, right? If they are creating pollen, they're going to be creating a lot of it. And the closer it is to our house and in the areas that we're spending time, the more sick we're going to feel if we're allergic to that kind of pollen.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have done a lot of research on allergies because I have allergies and I really love to be outside.
Yeah.
Drives me kind of crazy when I can't. So I found the best reference for me was this guy called Thomas Ogren. And I'm actually going to show you this book. Can you see that book? Kind of. The Allergy-Fighting Garden. And this is something that you can find in the library. And he has references in there and all this work that he did. He is a horticulturist out of California, and he did his master's thesis working with allergies and plants because his wife is highly allergic.
Okay. And Becky, I will look for a link to that book so we can share a link to that for anyone who wants to check that out.
Cool. And he wrote a few other things too, and it's just fascinating how he talks about the different ways plants produce pollen. Of course, plants want to reproduce.
Yeah.
That's their whole purpose. They want to make new little plants.
Yes.
And some plants do that by having all of those sexual parts of a flower inside one flower. So like an apple tree, it's a perfect flower. It has all the parts that it needs. It doesn't need to puff out a lot of pollen into the atmosphere in order to pollinate itself.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to some trees that have a male and a female, like junipers. So if a juniper wants to reproduce, that male plant has to push out so much pollen so that it can get to the female and actually create another new juniper.
Yeah.
Right? There are some trees, like the Italian cypress, where the male flowers and the female flowers are on the exact same tree. But the female flowers are up at top and the male flowers at the bottom.
Huh.
So you can imagine that gravity kind of works against that.
Yeah. And don't you just wonder, like, how did that come to be?
Right? How did that plant decide that that was the best way to work? Right?
Oh, that's so funny.
So that plant has to put out a ton of pollen in order for some of it to get up to, to the females. Right. So you can imagine those trees or plants that are male only have male parts, are going to produce a ton more pollen than other plants that have all of those pieces in one flower.
Yeah.
Right. And then the ones that only have female parts are producing no pollen. 0.
Right.
So one of the best things we can do to get our landscaping to help us out is to have the female versions of these plants.
Yeah.
Right?
Is that something that's easy to do, easy to find when you're going to the nursery? How do you know? How does one go about finding a female tree?
That is really, really a good question. So if the tree is in bloom and making fruit, that is usually a good sign. That is usually a sign that it is a female tree.
Okay.
If you are trying to find out what sex a tree is in the middle of winter, good luck. But that's another reason why I really like this book, because it actually has an A to Z listing of plants, and it ranks them based on how much potential they have for allergy.
Okay.
So you have a 1 to 10 scale of this tree or this plant, because it does all different kinds of plants from ground covers to trees, can produce enough allergy that it's ranked a 7.
Right.
So that's probably not something you want in your yard. You probably don't want anything over 5.
Right. And that kind of made me think too, it's good to know what you're allergic to. So,
Yes.
And the allergists are not going to test for all of the plants listed. And allergist is not going to test for all the plants listed in that book. But they do test for a lot of the trees and a lot of grasses, at least in my experience.
They really do. And if you know that you're allergic to something like peanuts, then you can stay away from plants that are in the peanut family.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. So like a honey locust tree is related to peanuts.
Oh my goodness.
I know. But you can buy a female only honey locust tree.
Okay.
That wouldn't be a problem. And there are honey locust trees that have both female and male parts in the same tree and are not quite as allergic or quite as allergy producing
as a male
the male
tree. That's so cool. I feel
knowing your allergies is a great place to start.
I feel empowered by this information. This is great.
Yay! I'm so glad, because that is really what I want to do. I really want to kind of let people know that there is a way to make things better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any other tips for us, things that we can do?
Yes. Okay. This is something that I found interesting, because one of my horticultural friends, when I broached this topic to her, said, "Oh, that would be great. I've seen this landscape where it's just foliage. And that would be so great for people who have allergies, right? Because it doesn't have any flowers."
Yeah.
What's interesting is that's not true.
Yeah.
Because the smaller and more inconspicuous the flower is, the more likely it is that it has to create a lot of pollen to go on out, because it's not attracting insects or bees or
pollinators.
Birds.
Yeah.
The pollinators, right. The plants that are huge for pollinators are also really good for people who suffer from allergies. So if you've got a tubular flower that hummingbird has to get all the way to the back to find the pollen, that pollen is not traveling very far, and it's not going to be likely to give us a lot of allergies.
Interesting.
So a flower full yard is possible with very low allergy.
Well, and the other thing that I was thinking, I mean, usually the plants that produce flowers are the ones that are producing fruit, right? Like to get fruit, you have to have the flower first.
Right.
And so those are not the ones that are producing as much pollen, unless it's like you were saying, like a perfect flower that has the male and female parts. Anyway, this is my novice take on things, so correct me if I'm wrong. But like, we think flowers are going to be what make us allergic, but that might not be the case.
That is very true. So anything that you see that's going to be attractive to a bee, so the bright colors, the large petals, that is going to have a low allergy potential most of the time. So I say most of the time because one of my biggest offenders is Shasta daisies.
Oh my goodness.
Because, not necessarily because of the way that the flowers are put together, because they're huge pollinator plants, right? They are pollinated only by insects, but because that chrysanthemum family is something that a lot of people are really allergic to. So knowing, again, what your allergies are helps you know what all of those cross reactions are going to be.
Right. So it may be a low, like on the scale you were talking about, it might be a low number, but if you're highly allergic to it, that could kind of counteract right. That number.
And what he's done in here is any of those plants that are in high allergy families, like Shasta daisy, it would automatically rank higher because there are so many people who are allergic to it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so my Shasta daisies, I love them so much that I have to plant them in my yard anyways, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I think. But I put them in a part of my yard that I see all the time, but I'm rarely in.
Okay, good.
So I don't actually usually have reactions to them at all.
Wow. I love that you've taken this and implemented it into your garden design. I just think that's such a cool idea and a different way of thinking about landscape design than I've ever thought of before.
Right, and it has made such a huge difference. And also understanding that whole bucket theory has made a huge difference. When I've eliminated some dietary things that I know I'm allergic to, but I like anyways, and I try to put them in anyways, like peanuts. See, I'm allergic to peanuts. But when I don't eat M&Ms that have peanuts in them, I have more tolerance for my environmental allergies, so I can spend more time in the garden.
Yeah.
So it's a give and take.
Yeah. Yeah, and
right?
Yeah, I just think that's so interesting. Just all of it, because and just thinking about how food allergies tie into it. I'm allergic. This is another sidebar. You've got me talking about a topic I really enjoy thinking about. So I have some food allergies that are pollen related, which I think is fascinating. So it's, my body, when I eat this food, it thinks that it's a pollen and it reacts in the same way. So it's just fascinating. But
that's just so sad.
I know. So I'm highly allergic to all the pollens, and so I can't eat honey. Okay, we don't need to talk about my allergies anymore, but it's just a very interesting thing. So I would personally encourage anyone who's suffering from allergies to find out what you're allergic to, and then I need to check out that book. I think that sounds so interesting. And
it's something that I keep with me when I go to the nursery so that I can look up plants and I go, I love that plant. It has to be in my yard. I know that never happens to anybody else, right? I love it. I have to have it. And then I look it up and I'm like, but it is a 8 on this scale. It is going to make me miserable.
Yeah.
And so I'm just not going to buy it.
Do you have any low allergy favorites that you would recommend to our viewers?
One of my favorites is penstemons. Oh. There are hundreds and hundreds of varieties that are native to Utah. You probably know that. And they are all low allergy.
And beautiful. Beautiful
right?
flowers.
It is awesome. Yes. And they're drought tolerant. They're just like the best of all worlds. I absolutely love them. Let's see. Some of my favorite ground covers are sedum. The succulents, those are fantastic. Those are low allergy potential. Let's see, if we're looking at hedges. Oh, this one's interesting. So the yews. I love yews because they're soft evergreens. And, when you get into evergreens, you get lots of pricklies.
Yes.
And I like soft. I like textures that I can rub against. I'm a very tactile person.
Uh-huh.
So a female yew has almost no allergy potential, but you have to look for specific varieties. The male yew is not, they're all poisonous. Okay, so if you ate the plant, you would die. So you have to kind of know that going in. But the male not only produces copious amounts of pollen, but that pollen is also poisonous.
Wow.
So if you plant a male yew in your yard, even if you don't have allergies, if you spend a lot of time around it, you can actually be poisoning yourself.
Just from breathing in the pollen.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So it's important to know, right plant, right place.
Yeah.
Right. Another thing to note on this whole allergy spectrum, people always say that, bugs cause allergies, and that's true. The dander that they leave and, the skin casings that they leave around, that does cause a lot of allergy. If you're not taking care of your plants, or you're putting a plant in a place where it's not going to be very healthy, it's going to attract those kinds of pests. It's going to attract molds that cause more allergy. An unhealthy plant creates an unhealthy environment that really fosters allergies.
Okay, that's good advice. And we don't want those we don't want that anyway. So there's that's another reason to keep our plants happy.
Exactly. Sorry, I totally steered away from all of the recommendations. There's
I'm sure there are so many, but I loved getting just some of your favorites. I think that's just good to
there are so many.
have in mind.
Most fruit trees, as you noted, anything that's creating fruit is usually going to be low allergy because they have that um, perfect flower, right? Um, if you can find female trees of any variety, so ash trees, maple trees, you got to be careful with maple trees in Utah, right? Because a lot of them aren't adapted to our soils, and then they tend to get iron chlorosis and they
Right.
become a problem. But there are some maple trees that do really, really well in Utah. There's even a box elder tree that does not create a lot of seeds that does well in Utah. If you can find a female version of that, which probably isn't possible because if it's not creating seeds, it's probably a male, um, then that would be a good option. Linden trees are really good. Sorry, I have to read these because I have so many options. Hawthorns are fantastic. Hydrangeas. Mulberry trees are great if they're female. And again, that's the same thing with a mulberry tree. It creates fruit, and it's a pretty messy tree.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful about where you're going to put that in the landscape. Are you going to put it right next to a sidewalk or a driveway?
Yeah.
Probably not.
So if a tree is advertised as fruitless, does that mean it's a male tree?
Very possible. High possibility.
I'm thinking like, like people love the blooms on crab apples and choke cherries, but they don't love the mess that they drop. So if you're getting a fruitless or ornamental, I'm just curious if that's likely male or female.
And that's why you really have to look at what it is, because crab apple does not have male trees because it is a perfect flower.
Okay.
So depending on what it is, it's only ranked 3 to 4 on that scale. So it's a really good tree for an allergy-free landscape. So even if it's fruitless, that would be fine. It's been bred to not create messy fruit, but they can't change the fact that it has all of those female and male parts in one flower.
Right. And perfect flower is the technical term in this case.
It really is.
Yeah.
A perfect flower just means it has everything it needs to create a new flower, a new plant.
Right. All in one.
All in one, exactly.
Okay. Well, Becky, this was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this new way of thinking about designing our landscapes and selecting plants in a way that will help us feel better and be able to spend more time outside enjoying our gardens.
You are so welcome. I really, I would love to see a lot of people plant female trees, even though they do create messes, because those flowers just suck in pollen. Even if it's the wrong type of pollen, it's just sucking it in, right? And it's sucking in pollutants as well. So it's good for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I actually need to plant some trees in my yard, so I feel armed with information so I can make better decisions. That's great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Becky, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I wish you happy gardening. We'll see you next time.